Welcome to Radiation Safety Basics. The purpose of this video is to explore the sources of radiation, dosimetry, and the basic biologic effects of radiation. So let's get started. There are two basic sources of radiation: natural sources that include cosmic, where we get our food, water, or our air, and the ground. Man-made radiation comes from the nuclear industry and the ionizing radiation we use in medical imaging. Let's take a quick look at the annual dose limits. The general public is limited to 1 millisievert for continuous exposure and 5 millisieverts for infrequent exposure. Operators are limited to 50 millisievert or 5 rem a year. Let's look at some basic dosimetry measurements. A rad or a gray refers to an absorbed dose. Rad in fact stands for radiation absorbed dose. A rem or sievert refers to the unit of dose equivalent. Rem stands for radiation equivalent man and is an expression of the biologic response to radiation. Let's look at some basic biologic effects of radiation. The human response to radiation is dose dependent. Some cells are more radiosensitive than others. Response can be categorized as early effects, effects that are seen in a short time after the exposure, and late effects that may take years to develop. The laws of Bourgonje and Tribandot state high proliferation rate for cells and a high growth rate for tissues result in an increased radiosensitivity. This is why we shield gonads when it is all possible and try not to X-ray during the first trimester of pregnancy. The early effects of radiation include acute radiation syndrome, local tissue damage, hematologic depression, and cytogenic damage. An early response occurs within minutes or days after radiation exposure. When performed properly, these effects are never seen in general X-ray. Late effects of radiation happen months or years after exposure. Both early and late effects need a high dose of radiation to occur, but we should be always ever cautious and assume even small doses are harmful, since dose is cumulative. There are many examples of local tissue damage by radiation. The first is erythema, or skin reddening. This response is followed by desquamosization, which is a form of skin ulceration. The gonads are affected, in particular the sperm and the oocytes, and these are the most radiosensitive cells while they are in the stem cells phase. Key biologic factors that affect radiosensitivity include the oxygen effect, age, recovery, and chemical agents. The oxygen effect says tissues are more sensitive to radiation in oxygen. Diagnostic X-ray imaging is performed under full oxygenation conditions. The age of the biologic structures affect the radiosensitivity as well, with newest, youngest being most radiosensitive. Recovery demonstrates cells can recover from radiation damage if the dose is not sufficient enough to kill the cell in the first place. And there are some chemicals that can modify radiation response. Radioprotector chemicals are not used in humans, unfortunately, because their increased dose tends to kill the host. When looking at dose-response relationships, a linear dose-response relationship is directly proportional to the dose response when you put it on a graph, and can have a threshold or not. A threshold response will occur at some specified value on the chart that is greater than 0. A non-threshold response will occur at any point, regardless of the size of the dose. Nonlinear responses are not directly proportional, and they create a curved line on the chart. So just remember, a linear will cause a straight line on your charts, nonlinear will cause a curved line. Because the human body is an aqueous solution containing about 80% water, irradiation of water is the principal radiation interaction in the body. When water is irradiated, it dissociates into other molecular products. This is called the radiolysis of water. Let's look at direct and indirect effects. If the initial ionizing event occurs on the target molecule, like a DNA, it is a direct effect. DNA is a critical target. If it occurs On a distant non-critical molecule, it is an indirect effect. The principal effect on humans is indirect, as in radiolysis. Low chronic irradiation does not impair fertility. All observations point to the first trimester as the most radiosensitive period, in particular the first 2 weeks. During the period of major organ formation, during weeks 2 through 10, 2 effects can occur: skeletal and organ abnormalities. And the relative risk of leukemia is a risk of 1.5, which is small. Genetic effects are linear and non-threshold. Any dose has risk. Frequency of radiation-induced is low. In late effects, we have latent periods. These include cataracts with a latent period of 5 to 30 years, leukemia of 4 to 7 years, and they're still at risk after 20 years, thyroid cancer for about 20 years. There are only 8 cases per 10,000 people irradiated with 1 rad of radiation for total cases of risk of malignancy. I want to thank you all for joining me. Come back, read your book. A lot of this information came directly from Bashang, so good luck to you, and good luck on that test.